going.
Wow, great, great. Okay, so the two worlds. We all live between these two incredibly different worlds and the frustration that comes from living there. So Colleen and I met because we were trying to navigate these two worlds. We met 5 years ago at an IDA conference in Baltimore. And at the time, we were both there sort of seeking information to help our own kids kind of learn about dyslexia, learn, you know, what we needed to, how we needed to be talking back at our school, with our schools and things like that. But we were there and I think connected, and there were a whole bunch of other parents there that year too that we really connected with, because what we were all experiencing was this real disconnect between this type of environment where you're hearing researchers talk about the success they're having with their evidence-based programs and you know, all these great assistive technology tools being demonstrated, and it just like you're here and you feel hopeful and you're like, oh, this is great, that might work for my son, or that's really great. But this is not the world that we live in our public schools, as I'm sure you all are experiencing. So just to acknowledge that for families, because for a really long time I thought I was crazy. Like I thought that I was being too demanding, or I was expecting too much from my school, or, you know, because you kind of get segregated into your little one-person island, your one-family island, and I didn't have other people to connect to and talk about with it. So I really questioned whether the things that I was expecting or asking for, were they reasonable or not? And when I met friends like Colleen and others and got more secure in knowing what was in this other world, like this evidence-based world, like I really started to gain the confidence to realize that that was what was happening, and I shouldn't feel that it was me, that it was a system that was broken. And we really are living within those two worlds, and this talk is going to be a little bit about how to navigate them. Do you have anything to add to that concept? Because I know you feel it too.
No, I definitely feel it. I will say, I remember sitting in an IEP meeting, and my daughter was in 4th grade at the time, and I was advocating for more intervention because the gap wasn't closing, right? And all I kept saying is, if we leave 5th grade and she's not reading on grade level, who teaches reading in middle school, you know? And they kept trying to deny the extra services, and I just kept saying, isn't it your job to teach these kids to read? I mean, are we in elementary school? Do we still do that in elementary school? You know, I just remember being so frustrated. Like I felt like I was asking for such a basic thing, and yet they kept acting like I was asking for a diamond ring, you know?
Yeah.
It's something so out of the norm.
Yeah.
And so yes, it's can be extremely frustrating for parents.
Yeah, and then there's sometimes those little glimpses of where the worlds are colliding. You always understand the two worlds when you're here among friends that know and have that same experience of what's happening. But then have you ever experienced like when it sort of just shows that glimmer to you, like the teacher in the hallway that'll kind of whisper to you, like, keep asking for what you're asking for. And it's like this shock, like, oh my gosh, I've been feeling like I've been that parent, but here's like a teacher sort of giving me a little bit of encouragement to go on. So I kind of think we hang on to those like for dear life, like, okay, all right, I don't need to put this pressure on myself. I am making those steps forward. So hopefully this talk is here to validate all of you, like all of the work that you're doing for your kids, like that you're on the right path. You're trying to get these two worlds to collide, and it's a really difficult task. So the first thing that you need to do, and these slides are just going to be little placeholders to keep us moving in this conversation this morning, but one of the first things that we kind of identified as really important to do as early on as you can, and you're already doing it because you're all here at this conference today trying to soak up information, but it's really important for you to understand your rights and your child's rights in whatever education setting they're currently in, but also to understand the responsibilities that come with that. So I'll just share a little bit about my journey there. So my kids are in public school. They've been in public school, and that's where they've received their services. So I spent a lot of time understanding New Jersey's special education code right from the bat. I knew that they were not in special education at the time, but I had had some experience with friends' kids that had it, so I knew that that was probably where I was heading. So I got in touch with my state's Parent Training and Information Center. In New Jersey, it's called SPAN. Every state in the US has one of these federally funded parent training and information centers. They are funded through IDEA, so they are a resource for families of children in special education, and their main charge is to help families understand the special education system and their rights. So what is it called in Georgia?
It's Parent to Parent of Georgia. Parent, the number 2, Parent of Georgia.
Great. So in every state, it is usually a nonprofit that accepts that grant funding from the federal government. So they will have different names, but there's a website that you can go to called Parent Center Hub, and that has an interactive map, and you can click on your state, and it will show you the parent centers. Some states have more than one. Some states just have one. So you check those out, and you get connected. This is the one thing that I will tell you about those centers. They are very, very good on helping you understand special education codes in your state and the federal law and statutes, but they don't go very deep into specific learning disabilities or dyslexia unless you're lucky enough to have a state center that has an employee there that has that as their personal, family disability issue. They tend to always be staffed by individuals who either have disabilities or children with disabilities, so that type of resource is really valuable to make connections, but I just give you that one caveat that they may not be as well versed on evidence-based reading practices and things like that, but they're extremely helpful in understanding the law and what your rights are. So other places that you can go to get this information, Rights Law, right? That's a website, and there are books by Pete and Pamela Wright, and the Wright is WRIGHTS, and then law, LAW.com. And they have a couple of books that are probably in the bookstore, I would imagine. And they are really excellent in understanding special education law, again, and they give lots of tips and tricks about advocacy. I personally love those books and have used them, and that's where I did get a lot of other information about my children's rights. But you see, I also put up there that responsibilities. So this is one mistake I made along the way, and I learned from, and I don't make this mistake any longer. It's really not helpful to sit in meetings or send emails where you're quoting your rights or your law. Like, Special Education Code New Jersey AC Chapter 16.2 says, da-da-da. That does not help build relationships. I learned that the hard way. You really do get put into that parent box when you're exhibiting those types of behaviors. And I made those mistakes for many years in the beginning, and I had difficulty kind of moving forward in some of my interactions with school officials or administration or even some teachers, because I really had an edge to myself because I was living in such frustration and really kind of desperate anger. That I kind of was acting that way. And I can look back on that now and say, wow, I probably could have gotten to some collaborative solutions a little bit faster if I wasn't so angry and really like letting that show forth. But this is what I'm going to say to you. I'm not a Pollyanna standing up here telling you that I see the world through rose-colored glasses and that the collaboration is easy. I tend to, in presentations like this, to truly give what it feels like. Sometimes I'm just swallowing the anger enough to make sure that I can move forward and get things going for my kids. So please know that if through the rest of the morning I sound like I'm making it sound easy or, oh, no, everything's fine in these relationships, it is challenging every day, every interaction. But I know that it's my responsibility to be that advocate for my boys and to find the way to be the collaborative partner and to keep the conversations moving in that direction. So that's my one tip. Don't go around, copying state codes or education laws and putting the numbers in and really being that, like, I got you. Things like, I'm in New Jersey, there's a law that, evaluation reports must be sent 10 days before a meeting. If it comes 11 days, are you going to be filing a state complaint? Like, those types of things, just learning where things matter and I need to really invoke my child's rights, and where some of the things maybe aren't impacting, I'm just angry that they're not doing what they should be doing. So that's kind of my advice there. Do you have any more about?
No, I mean, I did the same thing. I was angry in the beginning. The one thing I will say that a big mistake I made is I was so focused on them identifying it as dyslexia and saying dyslexia and getting her the appropriate interventions that I missed out on recognizing that there were other teachers in the building, maybe not in special ed, who had better training, as it turns out, than the special ed teacher had. And so I always tell parents, if your child's weaknesses are correctly identified and they're getting intervention that's working, don't argue, Focus on the weakness and the appropriate intervention, not where that's happening as much or what they're calling it. Is the weakness being addressed by an appropriate intervention with a teacher who's appropriately trained? That's really your main focus. Wherever that takes place in your school building, let it be there.
Yes. Oh my gosh. You're making me trigger. I did the same thing with my oldest son. Man, that fight was to get them to say dyslexia. And by the second time around, I kind of realized that that is not where my energies need to focus on. It's about linking correct interventions. And yeah, that's a big one. And it's a hard one, I think, for a lot of parents to understand. That label does mean something to us, and it's like diving a little deeper and truly understanding like what do we need to see happening. And sometimes it feels like the only route to that is through the label, but it's actually not true. There are a lot of good things that can happen under more general labels. It's just you being knowledgeable about them and making sure that that's actually is what's happening. So do you want to take this one, Colleen?
Okay. So identify the resources that I have used, a lot of them. I started out with attending the IDA International Conference. Many of you may have started out here today.
Is there anyone that this is your first IDA conference?
Okay.
Yes.
Yay!
Oh, we're so glad you're here.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's a great, huge step in the right direction for your kids. So I started off at IDA conference, and then I found that my local chapter also did a lot of free outreach for parents, and I pretty much traveled to everyone that they offered within that whole next year. And they were great. They bring in really good speakers, and they helped educate me on what dyslexia was and what their appropriate interventions were. Because without that knowledge, I felt so unempowered in the meeting. And that's what made me so defensive and argumentative, is because I didn't really know what I was talking about, and I felt like the people at the table didn't know what they were talking about. So I'm like, where's the dyslexia expert? Okay, I guess it's going to have to be me, And so that's what I set out on the path to do. And then from there, I just want to throw out a couple other things. There's some private schools in our area that offer great outreach. Yes, they are private schools. They're extremely expensive. I was very intimidated to walk into any of their outreach events. But they offer them. And so anything that was offered for free, I pretty much showed up to. The other thing that I chose to do, I bought Sally Shaywitz's book. There's a bunch of them out there. I happen to like hers. Some people think that it's too hard to read. My mom couldn't understand it. But I liked it because I could refer to certain pages. I highlighted pages and I referred back to it. So I liked her book. I also went and consulted with a lawyer. I did not bring a lawyer to any IEP meetings. But paying that consulting fee, he gave me a whole lot of knowledge just sitting with him for the 2 hours. That to me was worth it. So there was some private expense that I chose to go to, but it's a choice. Everyone's path is their own. Then I also asked those lawyers to come and speak to our groups for free. So I did go and pay him, but then I said, hey, you want to come to our area and do a presentation for parents for free? And so that kind of started me on the path of IDA did some really great outreaches, but every time I asked a specific question about public schools, there didn't seem to be resources in the audience. And so I kind of worked with IDA to branch out a little bit more to some more broad-based outreach events. And so we host a lot of events with IDA even still now. And I got tired of driving all over my state, so I organized outreach events right in my own area. And believe it or not, lots of parents come. And so instead of having to drive down an hour to go to a meeting in Decatur, we have monthly meetings during the school year right at the Board of Education in Forsyth County. If any of you live anywhere near there, you're welcome to come to any of them. And I will tell you that in the beginning, we averaged 6 to 12 people in attendance. Now we average 40 to 50 people, parents and educators that come to these free outreach events, and we bring in lawyers, we bring in psychologists, we bring in people from other districts. We've had all kinds of speakers, and IDA has been fabulous about working with us to provide speakers. And we also work with Understood. We work with Parent to Parent. So you can create free outreach events in your area if you'd like.
That's excellent. Yeah, I did similar things. So Sally Shaywitz's book was the first one that I went to the bookstore and picked up. And at the time, it was a relatively new release. So
Right.
it was like groundbreaking. There's a book with everything right in one little nice, neat package. But what I would do with that, and this kind of didn't happen right away, but over the years, this was a trick that I used. So I have Sally's book, which is still, I think, all these years later, a really valuable resource because it's a great first read. It's kind of, there are some chapters that are a little more intense, but there are some that are really, and there's lots of like little case studies, like student examples, which I love those too. But I have gone through that book and put little sticky notes, and I've wrote notes in the margin, and I've underlined things that relate to my own kids or really important points. So, and my kids are older now, so this is not something I'm still doing, but when they were younger, I would give that copy to their new teacher and do it in a really nice, friendly way, like, I didn't know much about dyslexia. I'm sure you do, but I was wondering, like, this was a great book that I just found. I don't know if you've read it. Would you be interested? And no teacher is ever going to be like, no, thank you. I'm not interested to read that. But many of them, every one of them, would say, oh, that would be great. And I would say, well, let me leave this copy with you. Just let me know when you're done with it. You can just get it back to me. But they were actually getting an annotated copy of it based on the points I really wanted them to pay attention to because of my own kids. And I would have like, Hudson does this, or, like underlining and highlighting different sections that I thought would be really helpful for the teacher. And then like a month or two later, I would buy a new version of it, and I would say, oh, would you mind if I grab my book back? There's so many notes in it that I want to, and I would give her a fresh copy of it. So that's just a little trick I learned. I know, a little devious, but I thought like, oh, this might be good. And mainly that came about because I was like learning about like the little concepts in that book, and I'm thinking, I'm not sure my son's teacher gets this, but am I going to go in and act like the know-it-all and say da-da-da? So you can have then conversations in the hallway like, did you see that one part in there about this, or in your student-teacher meeting? So that was one little thing I did. The Parent Training Center in New Jersey, ours is called SPAN. I became a groupie. And I eventually started working there because I loved the work that they were doing so much. But when I started working there, I found out the term that they had, that there are certain parents that become groupies, because I went to every single free event they had, but I learned so much from that. And sometimes they even have courses, like parent advocacy courses that you can go to for like 6 weeks, and you really, really learn in depth about the law. So that I highly recommend. And just like finding the supports, like thank you for sharing about the local Georgia stuff going on. I actually found that there was a parent support group in my district for kids with disabilities. Now, it wasn't specific to dyslexia, but once I started going to those meetings, I met like 3 or 4 parents that learning disabilities was their child's issue, and we kind of formed a real strong instant bond, and we did go on later to really start bringing in speakers to that group and stuff like that, so it kind of branched from there. So does anyone else have ideas for resources that you've found helpful, or supports that you think sharing would be great? Or it's too long on a Saturday. Yeah.
So most of our events are listed on the IDA Georgia website. They're also listed on the local, now it's a nonprofit organization actually. It's called Dyslexia Network of Forsyth. But there are other networks popping up all over Georgia as a result of us kind of spreading the word about what we did. Nobody wants to travel very far for the information. Everybody wants it to be in their back door. So Cobb is also doing outreach. Decatur does outreach on a regular basis. I don't mean like just the IDA outreach that's all over the state, but specifically parents in that area are organizing regular meetings. So there's a lot of them. And we are working right now trying to figure out how can we put it all in one place. Because if you're a Cobb parent, you don't know about the Cobb network. If you're a Forsyth parent, you don't know Forsyth. So we are trying to help communicate it better to parents. But there's a lot of resources right now in the Metro Atlanta area, some in the outside of Metro Atlanta area, but a lot more obviously in Metro Atlanta.
Great. Yeah. I don't know if it comes from Kansas, but you are. Okay. If you're from Kansas, Wichita, Kansas has a school that's specialized in dyslexia remediation. That's all they do. And so that was my first experience with dyslexia, and they have all kinds of training too. So I've become their groupie.
Yeah,
it's good. And if you go on their website, they have Dyslexia 101. They have how to experience dyslexia, dyslexia in the law. So they have an advocate who comes there and gives training. So if you're, I don't know if anyone's, you're from Kansas? Missouri? Is anyone else from Kansas? Okay, so if you're near there, that's a good source. Well, that just makes me think you two need to talk because you're not far from each other. And that is another way to build support around yourself. Mm-hmm. We did not know each other until Baltimore, and we've been in contact with each other now for 5 years. We're friends. We don't see each other other than things like this. Right. But to pick up a phone or make a phone call, or if I happen to meet someone that's down south, I can, give Colleen a ring. So before you leave today, talk to the people around you in this room. Find out where they're from, what their interests are, what they're doing. I'm going to, if you don't mind waiting for the microphone, because they're recording, and it would be great to capture your question.
Just another resource with Dr. Shaywitz is the Yale Center for Creativity and Dyslexia has a wonderful website. And the other thing is The Big Picture is a documentary about dyslexics, and it's so helpful.
And The Big Picture is a great outreach event. We use that one a lot. As a first initial, new parents love to come and watch a movie, and then we do a short panel discussion afterwards. It's great.
Hi, I'm from Christine. Ooh, that's loud. I'm from Texas, and we've had a law for about 30 years, and we have so much great free information. So for parents, you can go to Texas Gateway, which is the state Texas Gateway.com. And there are free modules that teach you about dyslexia. You can pass that on to your teachers. You can pass that on to your education agency if they're looking, if you don't have a dyslexia legislation, or it's really for teacher training. And we have a law that all teachers, even your PE teachers, have to be trained in dyslexia. So they go on and they'll do that Dyslexia Module 1, which is just really an overview, but it gives all teachers an understanding of what dyslexia is, what that looks like in a student. And another free website is Building Capacity. So it's the word building, and then the word capacity, and RTI.com. And they also have free videos and materials that you can use to educate yourself, but then also to pass on to your...
That's great. Those are 2 new ones.
Great. National Center for Improving Literacy is a new national organization that was formed through ESSA. So the Federal Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education, has allotted funding for a center to promote evidence-based literacy instruction. They have resources there both for teachers and parents, so you should check that out. I think they also had a booth here if you were lucky enough to stop in.
Hi, I'm from California, so if anybody else is, I'd like to meet you. Los Angeles. I just came from a workshop, understood.org. So
great online resources.
Excellent.
I agree.
No? Okay. I was going to say it, but go ahead.
I'm Liz Barnes from Decoding Dyslexia, New Jersey, and on our website we have a resource page which has New Jersey resources, national resources, a list of some of our favorite books that we kind of pulled our members and said, what books was your go-to books? So there's a lot of books that we went to. There's a lot of films that you can watch online, and often things to do locally is to just do a film screening and then have a conversation afterwards. It's something you can just truly do in your own little community, and there's a lot of stuff you can access online now. So, and a lot of the other Decoding Dyslexia groups have resources on websites too.
So you definitely want to check out decodingdyslexia.net and find the contact for your local Decoding Dyslexia chapter and get connected there, because that's where you'll find all the parents in your state that are caring about this issue and looking forward to doing things as a community. So what I did learn along the way as I was learning the law, learning how to take my responsibilities very seriously, and finding those resources and supports, was to realize that I had to be thinking about multiple buckets at the same time. So to become the best advocate I couldn't just zero in on it's the reading instruction or it's my child's self-esteem. They all are part of this package that you have to be thinking about and working around all simultaneously. So I kind of came up with this graphic a couple years ago when I was doing some parent advocacy work to just kind of help really make this a focus for parents, because when they would call with their point of need, it was always just on one side of that triangle, and they were so desperate around that one piece, and helping them understand, like, there's a lot going on with your child, and are you also thinking about this? Are you also thinking about what's going on this side? So of course the remediation is probably why we're all here right now at this conference, because this is a place to come to get the best information on the evidence-based literacy practices. So you do need to spend your time building your capacity to understand that piece. What is going to work for your child? What has worked in the past? If it's not working, what does that mean? Where do we go next? Where is the remediation delivered? Do I have resources to do things privately? Is it going to have to come from my public school? All of that stuff, there's a whole bucket there. Tends to be the most questions that I get to parents, that bucket. But there are others. There's an accommodation piece. So while you're building those skills that are weak, so you have a 5th grade student on a 1st grade reading level. That's important. We need to work on those reading skills. But what are you doing to make sure that that 5th grade student is having access to the 5th grade curriculum and the materials at their grade level? And we can lose sight of that because we're so focused on getting that reading intervention in there, and we're forgetting about, well, what is that pushing out if timing or scheduling isn't working properly, or what's happening to them when they're sitting in the 5th grade science class and they don't have the skills to interact with those materials. So thinking about accommodation is really important. And then the advocacy piece, we're talking about parent advocacy in this session, but our kids need to learn to become advocates for themselves. When they're little, we're probably not thinking about this very much. And with my older son, I wasn't. But by the time 7 years later, my younger son came along, he was coming to his IEP meetings, not sitting for the whole meeting, but he came in for the first 10 or 15 minutes to meet that team, to say, this is your support network in school. This woman is your speech helper, whatever they call them to the kids in school, your speech and language helper. This is your gen ed teacher. She's always going to be pulling for you. This is your special education teacher. Like, he needed to know who those people were so that if he was experiencing problems in a school day, he knew who to turn to or who was on his side. He didn't stay for the parts of the meeting where we were talking about his progress monitoring results or areas that he was struggling in. He didn't need to hear that. He knows that's going on. He knows things are hard. But just for those first few minutes to come in and meet the team and know about it. And by the time he was in 5th grade, he was advocating for himself. Just a quick story. I think we were going to have to pick up the pace here, but I'll share one quick story. So by the time he got to 5th grade, New Jersey was now using a PARCC testing, which is a standardized state-based measure, and they had a lot of great tools in it that were available as accommodations, and we knew that he was going to need some of those because although he was reading really well now, his writing and his handwriting are still significant deficits. So I was pushing really, really hard to get him a scribe for that test. And the district was really willing to offer that. So when we sat down at the meeting to sign the paperwork to get that set up for him, I did not know this, and this was my problem as a parent. I did not consult him before I started my advocacy work. He spoke right up at that meeting and said, I don't want a scribe. He said, I want to use my assistive technology. He said, if I have to wait for another adult to scribe what I'm writing, he said, it throws me off because it takes the scribe longer to get it down on paper than if I'm just talking into my iPad, and I have to go back and do the same editing for punctuation and all of that anyway. He said, so I would rather figure out a way to use my tool. And wow, was that hit me really hard, because by this time, this is my younger son, 5 years into his advocacy work, and I was like, how am I still making these mistakes? I should have consulted him and asked him what accommodations he thought were going to be necessary on that exam. And he just showed me that somewhere along the way he was picking this up because he did it. He advocated for himself. So just thinking about that all along the way, and this goes back to the responsibility side too. If your child is seeing you be a really aggressive advocate or letting your emotions and anger show in these meetings or in how you're interacting with the teaching staff, that's what they're learning about how to advocate for themselves, and that will not get them very far in life if you're seen as a really demanding person or an angry person. So think about that. That's another part of that responsibility piece. Like, I'm teaching my child how to advocate while he's watching me and what I'm doing. So I just like to put that out there because we really get, as parents, we get zeroed in on one thing, and sometimes the big picture, we just have to be reminded to come back to it.
So my 13-year-old recently said, "Mom, I'm the one who's dyslexic." Kind of an eye-opener.
Okay. I don't remember. Miss May?
I don't remember.
Communicate and collaborate well. Okay, so we talked about this a bit. We walked in this morning, I'm like, I forget the slide order. Who's doing which one? So communicate and collaborate well. We've been talking about this. You really do need to see yourself, and maybe sometimes you are the team member that's there to be the one that makes sure that this is happening. A lot of times we know what happens at the table. It feels like it's one side of the table, and then usually it's like a whole other side out there. So how can we be thinking about ways to move the team to consensus, to keep the conversation focused on the child, to not go down those rabbit holes of the frustration and all of that kind of stuff. So this is what I learned at my PTI. This was a training that we did, and I include it now because I think it was one of the best pieces of information I learned along the way. And it was actually how to negotiate. So as part of a team, we want to negotiate around the child's interests and needs, but we're most comfortable as human beings kind of just focusing on our positions, like what we want. And it's called interest-based negotiating. So let me just walk you through kind of this concept and ask questions if you're not really getting it. So we always want to be focused on the why. So keep that as the overarching thought. A position is the what, right? It's a specific solution proposed to resolve a problem. I'm going to use your example that you just gave this morning. So your position was, I want you to use dyslexia and put him in special ed and have it labeled that way. Okay, that was her what. So the only thing she gets to that is yes or no. Right. Then there's the way to negotiate around your interest, and your interest is the why you want something, why you need something. So that's the underlying need or the desire that gives the position its life. So had Colleen, which I'm sure she learned along the way, had Colleen focused on, my child has dyslexia, which means he has really poor word decoding skills, his fluency is not there, he's not automatic in his reading, it's impacting his spelling. If that why, and we need to get him supports and services now, because if he doesn't build those foundational reading skills, what is going to happen as he gets older and the tasks get more complex? Had she stayed there, perhaps she would have heard about those resource teachers in other areas that had excellent training that would have met her child's needs. So when you stay in the area of talking about why you need something or why you want something, it allows the team to bring more solutions to the table than just a yes or no to the one thing that you're asking for. That, when you said that, I was like, I'm using that example. The typical example that I give here is, I want Wilson reading, right? I want Wilson reading for my child. Well, okay, that can be your platform and that's your position and you're not going to be happy until you get that. But what if that stops the conversation from you actually understanding that your school district has a really wonderful structured literacy teacher somewhere else, or your district uses a different program that actually is evidence-based and would meet your child's needs. So you want to try to stay out of that realm of it's just yes or no and it's that simple. You want to get more conversations going and more solutions that then you then have choices to work through. So parents need to be asking themselves, why why is this solution that I'm proposing so important to me, and then focus on that why.
I think, though, at the same time, it brings up the issue, for me, at the time at least, was that I didn't understand what dyslexia was. I didn't understand that it was a weakness in phonological processing. I looked at that data that they provided for me, and I didn't know how to interpret it. And so a lot of it really is lack of understanding. And then I just started regurgitating what I heard, which was to ask for certain things, right? We hear that Wilson's a great program, so then we start asking for Wilson because it's something we know. We know it's evidence-based, when really my focus should have been to understand what my daughter's weaknesses were so that I could focus on appropriate interventions.
Yep. And why we're pulling out all these bullet points, right? They're all things that you need to be constantly building, and we are sharing some of our mistakes along the way to help you understand, like, it takes a long time to get here. It kind of starts to become, it starts to feel like it's your job and you're the case manager and you're the one that's pulling this whole train along, but that's normal. It is normal to feel overwhelmed by it all because we're all there. But the kids who have the best outcomes, they're the ones that have parents that are sitting in this room. And we have to remember that sometimes the work that we're doing is going to help those students that maybe aren't going to have that level of resource behind them. So we're doing this for our own kids, but we're also doing it to improve a whole system, and we should be proud of ourselves for that. So building support networks. Colleen is one of mine, Liz is one of mine, Christine, new friend that I met this time at this conference. So you really do need to take the time to make sure that you are connecting to other parents that are also on a similar journey, to just get rid of that, it's me, I feel crazy. Who can you vent to before you write the email? Who can you get on the phone with before you walk in that building? We really need to do that for each other. So I do encourage, if you're here and this is your first conference and you came alone, do not leave without phone numbers and emails of other parents that you can connect to and pick up the phone and talk to or send an email to. I found a support network at my own school in that special ed group. Like I said, not all of the parents were dyslexic parents, but just talking to other parents that knew what it was like raising a child that learned differently. I for a long time, didn't feel that I fit in at the soccer meetings and the PTA meetings and things, because other parents were talking about things that I was like, wow, that's such a low priority on my list. I want to get my kid to read. Like, I am not worried about, did he make the level 1 this or that? Like, it just felt like my issues were so different than others around me. And until I started to find other parents that I could kind of be myself around, worrying about the teacher that's grading harshly and they should be getting A pluses and we're getting A minuses, like, I could not relate to those types of things. So finding the support network supports, I don't know, I just think, like, an example of how we met at that conference, and I met so many other parents there too, like, it really just set off. And it was early years of decoding dyslexia at that time. Liz, you met Colleen the same time I did, and that was kind of the birth of really realizing how we needed each other. So connect to your DD groups.
Yeah, and attend outreach events and connect to your local parents.
Yeah. And then the other part of it is think about your kids too. Your kids need to have a support network around them. How selfish of me to sit here and say I couldn't relate to my other parent peers. I'm sure my son at the same time was feeling the same way. I know he was. I was seeing the writing on the shower steam door, I'm stupid, that kind of stuff. So finding places for your kids to connect to other kids. Talk about your group, what you just told me this morning. The Georgia, the D for kids.
For kids. So we found that our kids, when we asked our schools, are there other dyslexic kids? No, you're the kid's the only one. Really? Okay. And so we had a mom who was just determined to help her child understand that there are other kids out there who have dyslexia. And she created some opportunities for the kids to get together. And they were really simple, free. I think all of our events were free. We found places to host events for our kids for free, and the parents and the kids got together, and it changes their perspective. I remember the first time that group sat down, and we had somebody who was an educator who understood dyslexia sit and just have a conversation with them about dyslexia. And they were so amazed that these other kids had the same thinking process and problems at school, and frustrations at school. And so it's amazing what happens when kids find out they're not the only one also.
Yeah.
And if your kids are in public school, probably they feel like they're the only one, because public schools don't announce what disabilities anybody has.
Right. So you can find places for them to connect to other dyslexic kids or learning kids with learning differences, but then you can also just find a place for them to escape it all, right? A specific interest they have, art club
Hobbies.
or a sports team or something, and then they can be somewhere where they don't have to live in the dyslexia, right? They can have some other talent or interest shine through.
It's so important to balance their activities and their schooling, because schooling is so hard and it takes so much time. I remember feeling like I needed her to have all that extra time. She couldn't do activities, but the reality is she needed the activities, and so we did keep her in, the activities that she just really loved.
I'm going to give her more. And that brings me back to the triangle, right? I think we fall into that trap. But you come home from school, we have to go to tutoring, all of that stuff. But that advocacy at the bottom, to become a good self-advocate, you have to feel confident in yourself. And some of these other, trade-offs of making time for the things they really love and are interested in, that's just as important. So it's that balance I remind you to come back to.
Is there an opportunity for Eye to partner with Decoding Dyslexia?
It's funny, I said that after I left David Flink's
we were just talking about that
this morning. I would love to see that happen, because we are the parent portion and what I see us as the parents, I think I can say this, I hope I can, is that we have no budget and we have no monetary connection. And so my goal really has always been that everything I do, I offer to parents for free. And if I can't offer it for free, that has to be at a reasonable cost. We don't host any events that cost any money. But even our resources that I put out there to parents, I always try to have something free on the page, and then I have something low cost. And there's a ton out there that costs a lot of money, and it's really good, don't get me wrong. But I feel like parents need to know that it's not just going to cost you money in order to get what your kid needs. They need to know that they can create a path that works for their own family's financial situation. And so I would love to be able to spread what he does.
And they're a fabulous organization, but they have their hubs across the country. But I do know that they just released an app, which is somehow, I've downloaded it, but I haven't gotten into play with it yet. So maybe check that out and see what that's all about. But if you're in a state, you should contact them and see what you can get going, if there are different activities that you can get going. I am a little cautious to say, could Eye to Eye partner with Decoding Dyslexia, because Decoding Dyslexia is just parents. So if you're looking for a connection, reach out to them and say, is there something that you can do in our community? Decoding Dyslexia is not an organization, so there's not a leadership thing that could talk to another organization's leadership thing and say, let's get going. It's just parents. So if you love Eye to Eye, please reach out to Eye to Eye and find out what you can get going. Can you get a chapter connected in schools in your state? Can you bring speakers out? That is what I would encourage you to do.
And we did have them come and speak. There's a mentor at Georgia Tech who's trained with Eye to Eye, and we had an assistive technology event for parents going on at Georgia Tech and an event for kids going on at the same time, and they did finally come and speak.
So a strengths-based perspective, we kind of merged into this topic already. But did anyone go to the Is Dyslexia a Gift presentation with Carolyn Cohen a few days ago? No, it was a really, really good presentation, because I kind of go back and forth struggling with this issue, and she warned me that I was going to experience cognitive dissonance when I was in that session. Some things were going to make me feel like I'm uncomfortable with what she's saying, and some things were going to confirm what I believed, and it did. So when I'm talking about building a strength-based perspective, I'm not talking about this idea that dyslexia is my superpower, and it's a gift, and I'm going to have all these other wonderful things that come with it. Because that brings with it positives and negatives, right? So what about the child that doesn't feel like it's a gift and wants to give it back? Or the child that has interests, but they're not the Olympic swimmer. They love swimming. They like being around the water. So when we're talking about adopt a strength-based perspective, it's really to think about what are the things that your children are interested in, things that they have some aptitude in, or they talents, so to speak, and how can you foster that as something that helps them build self-confidence, self-esteem, because there is a part of their life that they can feel really proud of themselves in, and the pressure is taken off. Because the dyslexia follows them through that whole 6-7 hour school day. If you think it only impacts them in their reading block, that is incorrect. It is the whole day they're dealing with those types of things. And then homework time, and then tutoring time. So where are the places where we can really help them develop strengths? And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're dyslexic and they have this superpower strength. It can be something that we're cultivating and we're helping them find. And it can change. It can be horses when they're little, and by the time they're in middle school, it's music. So help them see that they are a whole person, and then also help their teachers and help them become advocates for themselves to help those that are working with them also adopt strength-based approaches.
And sometimes you have to find creative outlets. Like my son is not great at sports, but he happens to like baseball. So the Park and Recs is just way too competitive for his self-esteem, you know. He needed to be considered somewhat good at baseball in order to feel good about doing it. And so we found like a church baseball program that's much more low key.
So great.
And so sometimes it's like identifying where can they do what it is that they like.
Oh, that's such a good point. If you knew my little guy Hudson, he's really, really short and has always been very tiny for his age, but he thinks he's going to be an NFL player. So we got him into flag football. I was like, okay, you're not going to get crushed with your age level peers here, but it's the same kind of thing, like how to just feed them, feed their interests, feed their passions, and in a way that we know it's going to be a place where they're finding success.
Yeah, they don't need more failure.
Yeah, and then another note as a parent, I learned this one the hard way. We tend to want to overcompensate. You're so wonderful, you're great, you did such an excellent job. Oh my gosh, if that is not linked to something concrete that the kids actually understand what you're complimenting on, they see through that in a second, and it's actually self-defeating. They see you as, oh, that's just mom. And that doesn't build a child's self-esteem. If they think that you're just kind of overcompensating because you feel bad for something else and you're just so wonderful. So when you are making compliments or crediting something, make sure it's really tied to something great, like the effort that they're putting forth, or watching them be persistent. Like, give them that. Let them know what was really valuable about what they did. Not, oh, you did a great job, but oh my goodness, that was hard homework. You just stuck at that for 25 minutes. I'm really proud of you for that persistence, right? So that kind of thing, and I learned that the hard way because I heard that from my kids, like, oh, Mom, you have to say that. You're my mom. And I was like, oh, I can probably get better at this. So we've just spent the first part of this session, or most of the session, talking about some tips and tricks for individual advocacy work. So to recap, we talked about researching and learning what you need to know to advocate well. And Colleen made a great connection to some of the mistakes that she felt she made along the way was because she was just regurgitating stuff that she heard from others, and she didn't have that understanding yet. So that's a great first bullet point. Like, spend your time doing that. And the resources that you all shared, thank you for doing it. They could be places we can all turn to. Connecting to those local resources, communicating often with teachers and other professionals. So this was in a respectful way, in a collaborative-minded way, and in a way where you're always focused on the why, to keep that whole team focused on your child and the child's needs. Building a network of supportive peers for yourself, but also be thinking about what your child may need in that area, and then supporting your child's strengths. So, now what? What do you do after you, as a parent, start to feel more confident about the work that you're doing with your kid? What did you do, Colleen?
Share it with others.
Share it with others, right. So typically what we do see happening, those of us that are involved in the Decoding Dyslexia movement or other things in our state, there is a pattern that happens, right? A parent comes to you first because they're looking for information to help their own child. And then as that parent grows and becomes more confident and starts to feel more in control of what they're doing for their own child's needs, they really get the bug to say, I can do this for other people. I can set a trend. I can make a difference in my school, in my community, in my state. So the tips that we just walked through today, they translate so easily into systemic advocacy work. And Colleen already started to go there when she was talking about the work that she's been seeing go on in Georgia. So sharing your knowledge with others, and you started it in this room when you started sharing resources with each other. Find ways to do that. At the next IDA conference, could one of you be submitting a proposal to speak and just talk from the heart to other parents? Could you bring in speakers to your local school district to share resources, or to your local library or your local church? Start thinking about how you can share your knowledge and connect other parents to resources, and maybe even other educators to resources. In New Jersey, the Decoding Dyslexia group does a lot of outreach and community event work, and what we find is just as many teachers show up to get access to the information as parents. Collaborate and network with teachers and other professionals. Connecting to your lawyer and getting your lawyer to come in, that's what we're talking about. So if you've used someone as a resource, or you've developed a relationship with someone that has helped you, would that person do it for larger groups or for your friends or your community? Build a network of like-minded peers, or get connected to one at least and start participating there. And then helping others to accept and embrace the diversity that we were talking about celebrating in our own kids. So the general public probably has a lot of misconceptions about kids with learning differences or learning disabilities. So thinking through, what can I do to be a real advocate for the fact that the world is full of diversity, and that's what makes it a special place, and that's what's going to help us continue as a human race, because that diversity is absolutely essential, and we should respect it in everyone, not just our dyslexic kids, but everyone. So, on the systemic advocacy journey, this is a picture of where the dyslexia movement has come in 5 years. So when Colleen and I met, it was the early days of Decoding Dyslexia in New Jersey, and Colleen went home and decided that she was going to bring it to Georgia, and there were other states that were joining on along the way. This is a picture that was taken in Washington, D.C., not last summer, but the summer before, and this movement is growing. These are parents, families, kids, professionals from all over the country who came down to D.C. in the summer for a Hill Day. We had an advocacy day on the Hill, and we met in the morning, and we were on the lawn of Congress, and we heard all kinds of wonderful speakers. And then all of those individuals hit the Hill, and they were visiting with their legislators and telling their stories and advocating for supports and services for kids with dyslexia. These are some of the organizations in New Jersey that I found myself getting engaged with. I was doing all this personal advocacy work, and then I started making connections in my state to do work for New Jersey. So my Decoding Dyslexia chapter, Liz Barnes is my friend and co-founder there, and I'm really, really proud of the work that we've been doing, and it's given me opportunities to interact with all of these other organizations that you see on the slide that I probably wouldn't have been interacting with on a personal level for my own kids, but now I have an opportunity to be a voice because I'm speaking for all of the kids in my state, all of those families and parents, and really kind of using my story to help propel some policy and advocacy change. And that's my little guy Hudson up there. He was asked two summers ago to give the Pledge of Allegiance at the anniversary of the Americans for Disabilities Act. So it was really exciting. He was there with a lot of other wonderful advocates with disabilities, and he stood out in front of the Department of Education and he gave the Pledge of Allegiance. So I was really proud of him. I go to conferences and give talks like this and Dyslexia 101 presentations and all kinds of things because number one, I enjoy doing it, and number two, I really feel that it's my duty because I've learned all of this stuff, and I don't want the parent that comes behind me to have to reinvent the wheel and take all of that time to do it again. And this is just a picture in New Jersey. We released a New Jersey handbook recently, and I'm now going out in the community and helping parents and teachers see what's in that handbook and understand how it can impact them in their schools.
So these are some of the organizations that we've worked with here in Georgia and through Decoding Dyslexia. One that I'd like to point out through the Georgia DOE, if you're not familiar with, we have a state, everybody does, all states have a state advisory panel for special education. If you're not familiar with it, look it up on your DOE website. They do accept applications for that. And when I was accepted to serve on that committee, I was the only person on the committee that had a child with a specific learning disability in reading. They have since grown, but it's important that all disabilities be represented on that committee, but most often I think that they are a little bit skewed. So we work with IDA all the time in Georgia. They bring great resources and speakers for us. The PTA, one of the ways that I worked with my own PTA that you could do as well is I had our local chapter start a Exceptional Children's Committee, and we brought speakers through that. Now they're not all dyslexia focused, obviously. It's broader, but we still were able to communicate with parents through the PTA because PTA was hosting an Exceptional Children's outreach event. And so we tried to make them broad topics like advocacy, things like that. Understanding IEPs, we did that. Because IEPs are the same for everybody. Doesn't matter what your disability is. So that's a way to work with your PTA, I think. And the other ones are all kind of literacy-based organizations. Dyslexia Network for Sight is only one of the many networks that we have here in Georgia that have spawned up that are led by parents. And then we do Advocacy Day. We started it 2 years ago here in Georgia. Lots of other states do it as well. And it's really just an opportunity to raise awareness at your state level with the legislators.
Who's that little guy up there?
That's my Connor. He's one of my dyslexics. He came to advocate for dyslexia. The legislators, if you've never advocated or attended advocacy, they love to hear from kids. They'll cut you off in a heartbeat, but they will not cut off a kid. And so our kids really have a very powerful voice in exactly what your son was demonstrating to you, which is that, hey, Mom, you're not the dyslexic. I am. And so they have a much more powerful voice than we do as parents. So bring them along, bring them, introduce them to your legislator and have them tell their story. To hear a kid talk about how difficult it is to sit in school and feel like you're stupid is very empowering versus a parent saying, my kid's at school feeling stupid. It's extremely empowering for that child and for that legislator to hear that story from that perspective. So don't protect them, is my point. Don't protect your kids. Let them be the ones that go out and talk about what it is that they struggle with.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is just a slide to remind us what that journey is like, right? The parent's path to advocacy. You may think it's about getting services for your child, but it actually can be much, much larger. And this graphic shows the 50 states that participate in the Decoding Dyslexia movement. And there are also Canadian provinces at this point that are also engaged. But this just started with parents that were trying to it was Liz and I and many other parents in our state that were just looking to make that peer connection at the individual level at first. Just sharing our stories with each other and finding that they were so similar and that we were in different school districts and different settings in our state, but our stories were so similar. And somehow it just sparked this idea that, wow, we know we all want change, but maybe it's too hard for one person to do it. So if we join forces, maybe we can get something going where we could really start to see our influence. And we had no idea at the time that it would turn into a national movement, but it did very, very quickly. So if you're not engaged already, please consider reaching out. But if that's not for you, just doing the work is what's important, doing the advocacy work. Take care of your family first, gain that confidence, get that level of control, and then see if you are feeling that inkling to get out there and speak for others. The hashtag that we use as a movement is Say Dyslexia. So if you are a social media type person, please engage there and share what's happening in your community and let us know. It's a way to unify us. We use that hashtag all the time. And this is a picture going back a few years now, maybe 3 or 4 years. But we brought everyone together in New Jersey, and we had a big gathering to really help us all get better at social media so that we could grow the movement. So I love looking at this picture because it just reminds me how far we've come, and we've been very successful at using social media to do that. So that was kind of our humble beginnings back there. It doesn't look so humble. I'm pretty proud of that picture, seeing all those parents. I think we had over 20 states represented at that time. Mm-hmm. About that, yeah. So thank you so much. Decoding Dyslexia New Jersey and Georgia spent time putting this presentation together for you. So we have our website addresses up there, and if you are from a different state, you can go to the national website, and that will give you a link to your state chapter where you can connect. Thank you.